You think the worst kind of betrayal is a knife in the back, but it is not. The absolute worst is when they smile, pat your shoulder, and use your own blood and sweat to build a criminal empire masked as justice. They thought I was just another disposable pawn on their billion-dollar chessboard. What they did not know was that I had already changed every single rule before they even made their first move. Hello to all the amazing listeners of the Boss Revenge Stories channel. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep the lights on. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating more content for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or comments below. My name is Lucy Fox. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I was a senior data security analyst at OmniHealth Solutions down in Austin, Texas. If you drove past our headquarters on Congress Avenue, you would see a shimmering tower of glass and steel, an architectural marvel screaming modern innovation. Our lobby featured a 2-story digital waterfall and a massive, glowing slogan etched into imported Italian marble that read, "Innovating Data for Public Health." It was a beautiful, incredibly expensive lie. The entire operation was nothing more than a shiny veneer meticulously crafted to hide the bottomless greed of our chief executive officer, Julian Vance. Julian was the kind of tech executive who wore $1,000 sneakers with tailored suits and spoke in endless buzzwords about disrupting the healthcare space. To the media, he was a visionary humanitarian. To those of us in the server rooms, he was a shark who viewed human lives merely as data points to be monetized. OmniHealth was supposed to be a secure digital bridge between regional hospitals and specialists, ensuring that sensitive patient data flowed safely across highly encrypted networks. My job was to keep that bridge fortified. I built the firewalls, monitored the traffic, and made sure that when a sick patient trusted us with their most intimate medical histories, that trust was practically unbreakable. I was damn good at my job. As it turns out, I was a little too good. It happened late on a Saturday night. It was past 11 o'clock. Most of the city was out drinking on 6th Street, but I was curled up on my couch in the dark, running a routine diagnostic check on a secondary network cluster. That was when I saw it. A massive anomaly in the outbound traffic. A steady, heavy stream of data was bypassing our standard encryption protocols entirely. It was a raw, unmasked data dump routing straight out of our primary patient intake database. I sat up, my coffee growing cold on the table. As my fingers flew across my mechanical keyboard, I traced the routing tables, bouncing through 3 different proxy servers, desperately trying to find the final endpoint. When the destination address finally resolved, my blood ran cold. The data was not going to a partnered hospital or a certified medical research lab. It was flowing directly to an anonymous offshore server farm in a jurisdiction notorious for having zero data privacy laws. I dug deeper, pulling a packet capture of the rogue stream. I did not want to believe it, but the digital logs did not lie. Names, social security numbers, comprehensive medical histories, psychiatric evaluations, and genetic risk profiles, millions of them. It was an absolute goldmine for anyone looking to exploit human vulnerability. I cross-referenced the destination identifiers with known corporate registries on the dark web and gray markets. The pieces snapped together into a terrifying, undeniable picture. OmniHealth was not just processing medical records. They were illegally selling them in bulk to unauthorized insurance conglomerates and shadow data brokers. They were handing over the exact leverage these companies needed to deny medical coverage, hike insurance premiums, and profile vulnerable individuals without a shred of consent. And it was happening right under my nose. I needed to know if this was a catastrophic breach by an outside hacker or an inside job directed by the top floor. I decided to play dumb to test the waters. First thing Monday morning, I walked into the glass-walled office of Brad, our vice president of engineering. I pitched my voice to sound mildly concerned, mimicking the exact tone of an employee reporting a minor technical glitch, not a massive federal crime. Hey, Brad, do you have a minute? I asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. I was running routine diagnostics over the weekend and caught a weird configuration error. Looks like a chunk of the legacy patient partition is leaking outbound without encryption. It is probably just a routing bug, but I wanted to flag it before it causes a major compliance issue with the regulators. Brad was typing furiously on his laptop, but the moment I said the word unencrypted, his hands froze on the keys. He did not look up immediately. His jaw tightened visibly, and a bead of sweat formed at his temple. When he finally turned to me, his smile was entirely too rigid, his eyes darting away from mine. "Good catch, Lucy," he said, his voice a little too loud and a little too strained. "It is just a temporary testing environment the development team spun up late last week. Nothing to worry about at all. I will have them shut it down right away. Thanks for letting me know." I nodded politely, offered a tight smile, and walked back to my desk. But the moment I sat down and tried to pull up the system logs again to verify his claim, my monitor flashed red. Access denied. In less than 5 minutes. Brad had completely revoked my administrative privileges to that specific server partition. The trap was set, and I knew exactly who the predators were. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office had changed completely. It was subtle at first, the kind of corporate suffocation that creeps up on you before you even realize you cannot breathe. I logged into my workstation at exactly 8 o'clock, expecting to review the morning security patches for our primary network. Instead, my inbox was flooded with automated system notifications. My name had been quietly stripped from the 3 largest infrastructure projects of the quarter. They were suddenly reassigned to a pair of junior developers who had been with the company for barely 6 months. These were kids who still needed help configuring their local email clients. And now they were suddenly in charge of enterprise-level firewall protocols. I stared at the screen, the harsh glow of the monitor reflecting my deepening realization. They were building a wall around me, brick by digital brick. At 10:30, my desk phone rang. It was Human Resources. They did not ask if I was busy. They told me to come to the 3rd floor immediately. When I walked into the sterile, windowless meeting room, the director of Human Resources was sitting with her hands folded over a thick manila folder. She did not offer me a coffee. She did not even smile. She launched right into a highly rehearsed script about my recent performance. "Lucy, we have received several anonymous complaints regarding your workplace attitude," she said, her voice dripping with that artificial corporate concern. "People are saying you are uncooperative, overly defensive, and creating a toxic environment for the engineering team." It was a textbook gaslighting operation. I had worked 80-hour weeks for this company. I had never received anything less than a stellar performance review in my entire tenure. But I knew better than to argue. Arguing would just give them more ammunition to label me as combative. I nodded slowly, kept my expression completely blank, and gave them the exact subservient apology they wanted to hear. I left the Human Resources Department with a sick feeling in my stomach. As I walked back through the open-plan office, I passed by Brad's glass-enclosed suite. He was not at his desk, but his massive ultra-wide monitor was unlocked. A critical mistake for a vice president of engineering. I did not stop walking, but my eyes darted to the screen. He had an internal messaging application open, and the text was large enough to read from the hallway. It was a direct message to Julian. The words burned into my memory instantly. "Do not worry about the raw data leak," the message read. "I am drafting an incident report right now. We will pin the unauthorized transfer on a disgruntled lower-level security analyst acting alone. Grounds for immediate termination and legal action. Problem solved." My breath caught in my throat. I was not just being pushed out. I was being set up as the sacrificial lamb for a multi-million-dollar federal crime. If they filed that report, my career would be over, and I would be the one facing decades in a federal penitentiary while they counted their blood money. Right then and there, the loyal, hard-working employee inside me died. She was replaced by something entirely different, something cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate destruction, I was going to show them exactly why you never corner the person who holds the keys to your entire digital kingdom. On my lunch break, I drove to an electronics store on the edge of town. I paid $2,500 in pure cash for a high-end, encrypted laptop and a handful of untraceable prepaid data drives. I did not go back to the office. I drove straight to my apartment, locked the deadbolt, and pulled the blinds shut. I booted up the fresh machine and connected to a virtual private network routed through 3 different European countries. When I first built OmniHealth's primary architecture years ago, I knew that standard corporate security was often a double-edged sword. So, purely as a fail-safe for catastrophic system lockouts, I had coded a deeply buried, invisible backdoor into the root directory. It was a ghost protocol that bypassed every single internal alarm, unlogged and completely undetectable. I executed the command script. The terminal window flashed black, then green. I was in. I bypassed Brad's pathetic lockouts in less than 40 seconds. I did not just look at the logs this time. I vacuumed them up. I pulled down terabytes of internal communications, hidden server registries, and encrypted financial ledgers. I dug straight into the executive secure folders. It took 3 hours of relentless searching, but I finally found the Holy Grail. There they were, hidden under layers of encrypted subdirectories, master service agreements with shell companies posing as medical research firms. Attached to these agreements were explicit authorization forms for the bulk sale of unencrypted patient data. And at the bottom of every single page were the verified, cryptographic electronic signatures of both Julian Vance and Brad. They had personally signed off on selling out millions of sick people for massive offshore wire transfers. I downloaded every single file, duplicated them across 5 different encrypted flash drives, and leaned back in my chair. The trap they had dug for me was deep, but the grave I was about to dig for them would be bottomless. I needed an ally on the outside, not just a corporate lawyer who would bury this in civil litigation, but someone with the federal authority to kick down doors and seize servers. I immediately thought of Marcus. He was my old cybersecurity professor at the university, the man who originally taught me how to think like a ghost in the machine. 5 years ago, he left the academic world to become a senior cybercrimes investigator for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specializing in high-tech corporate fraud. Reaching out to him through any normal channels was completely out of the question. OmniHealth had incredibly deep pockets and an even deeper surveillance apparatus. They monitored everything. I left my apartment, purposely leaving my personal cell phone sitting on the kitchen counter to avoid any location tracking, and walked 1.5 miles in the rain to a rundown convenience store. I paid cash for a cheap prepaid cellular device. Standing in the cold drizzle of a Tuesday evening, hiding under the awning of an abandoned laundromat, I dialed a secure number I had memorized years ago. "It has been a long time. Lucy," Marcus said when he picked up. There were no polite pleasantries. I told him I was sitting on a digital bomb. I did not give him the exact specifics over the unsecure line, just enough to let him know it involved millions of stolen healthcare records and criminal intent at the absolute highest level of a major corporation. He understood the gravity of the situation immediately. "Give me exactly 2 hours," he instructed, his voice dropping into a professional monotone. "I will drop a secure routing protocol to your anonymous email address. Burn that phone right now." I crushed the cheap plastic device under the heel of my boot, kicked the pieces down a street drain, and walked home in the dark. Exactly 120 minutes later, sitting in the dim glow of my living room, my newly purchased encrypted laptop received a silent ping. It was a military-grade, peer-to-peer encrypted tunnel routed through federal servers. It was completely off the grid and invisible to OmniHealth. I uploaded the initial batch of documents, the internal communications I had scraped, and the forged service agreements bearing Julian and Brad's digital signatures. Marcus and his team reviewed the files overnight. By dawn, we were communicating via a secure text terminal. "This evidence is highly explosive," he typed on the black screen, "but these are just static files. Defense attorneys will argue they were fabricated by a disgruntled employee or taken entirely out of context. We need to catch them in the act of transferring the data to the unauthorized buyer. We need a definitive smoking gun." He was absolutely right. To bury Julian Vance, I needed to prove the data was actively moving across state and international lines to an illegal entity. I had less than 48 hours before the next scheduled massive data dump. I knew their exact timeline because I had secretly mapped the automated scripts Brad was using to siphon the files. I went to work crafting a highly specialized payload. It was not a destructive virus. It was a digital tracker. A microscopic line of stealth code woven directly into the metadata of the patient files. Think of it like a global positioning system tracker painted with invisible, digital ink. The moment the buyer on the other end received and extracted the encrypted zip file, the stealth code would wake up. It would instantly ping its exact geolocation, internet protocol address, and unique machine identifiers back to a secure federal server monitored by Marcus. I called it the silent whistle. Implanting that code was the most terrifying 30 minutes of my entire life. Sitting at my desk on Wednesday morning, pretending to look busy with mundane tasks, I used my Ghost Protocol backdoor to slip the tracker into the outbound queue just as the server clocks rolled over to noon. If Brad checked the file checksums, he would notice a tiny discrepancy in the total data size. My heart hammered against my ribs, echoing in my ears as the upload progress bar inched forward, but Brad was incredibly lazy and blinded by arrogance. He only cared about the money, not the technical hygiene of his crimes. The tracker embedded seamlessly into the vast ocean of stolen medical histories. The trap was fully armed and waiting. However, digital footprints were only half the battle. I wanted Julian's arrogance captured on tape. I wanted his own voice to be the nail in his coffin. The following afternoon, the atmosphere in the office was thick with an unspoken, heavy tension. I knew the executive suite had a private lounge, a soundproofed sanctuary where Julian and his inner circle drank expensive scotch and patted themselves on the back. It was located just off the main boardroom. During the peak lunch rush, when the administrative assistants were away from their desks, I slipped into the lounge. I slid a tiny voice-activated digital recording device deep under the thick leather cushion of Julian's favorite armchair. 2 hours later, I retrieved it under the guise of looking for a misplaced notebook. Sitting inside a locked bathroom stall, I put a wireless earpiece in and pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. It was Julian and Brad having a private celebration. Julian's voice dripped with a sickening, greedy satisfaction. "The third quarter margins are going to be absolutely astronomical," Julian boasted on the recording. "This new offshore buyer is paying triple the current market rate per 1,000 records. They do not care about federal compliance. And frankly, neither do I. As long as the board of directors sees the massive revenue spike before our initial public offering next week, we are completely untouchable. Just make sure you clean up that loose end in the security department by Friday morning." That loose end was me. Hearing him say it out loud, hearing the complete and utter disregard for the millions of lives he was casually trading for personal profit, extinguished any lingering shred of fear or hesitation I had left in my body. It was pure, refined fuel for my anger. I walked out of the restroom, shoulders squared, and headed back toward the engineering wing to pack up my personal belongings. I pulled out my employee badge to swipe through the secondary glass doors. The scanner beeped a harsh, flat tone. The light flashed a solid, unforgiving red. Access denied. I paused and tried again. Red light. I walked to the side stairwell and swiped. Red light. I checked my cellular phone. My corporate email account had been forcibly disconnected. My internal calendar was wiped completely clean. They had officially ghosted me from the network system. I walked down to the ground floor and tested the main lobby turnstiles. Green light. I tested the cafeteria doors. Green light. They had restricted my physical existence inside the building to the absolute bare minimum, just enough so I could walk into the building tomorrow morning and get officially fired. They thought they were caging me. They thought that stripping away my administrative access would leave me powerless, confused, and panicked. I stood in the middle of the bustling lobby, surrounded by the fake digital waterfall and the hypocritical marble slogan about public health. I did not panic. I simply smiled a cold, hard smile. The stealth data dump was scheduled to leave the servers and hit the buyer's network in exactly 12 hours. The federal agents were already sitting quietly on the receiving end, waiting for the ping. My time as an employee at OmniHealth Solutions was officially over, and I was perfectly fine with that reality. The chessboard was perfectly set. My pieces were locked into their final positions, and Julian Vance was about to walk blindly into a devastating checkmate. Friday morning arrived, exactly at 9 o'clock. The summons came. A junior human resources assistant tapped on my cubicle wall and asked me to follow her. We walked past the open workstations, the hum of servers, toward the executive suites. The execution chamber was the grand boardroom at the end of the hall. It was a massive cube of pristine, transparent glass, designed to project an image of corporate transparency. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. Inside, the tribunal was already seated. Julian Vance occupied the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He was leaning back, tenting his fingers, wearing a smile of predatory triumph. To his right sat Brad, looking like a lapdog who had just been given a treat, his chest puffed out with unearned confidence. To his left was the Director of Human Resources, her face locked into a mask of practiced, professional severity. They had deliberately left the chair opposite Julian pulled out, isolating me in the center of the room where everyone in the outer office could see but not hear. I walked in, ignoring the chair, and remained standing. "You wanted to see me, Julian?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat, stripped of any emotion. Julian let out a theatrical sigh, shaking his head as if he were deeply disappointed in a rebellious child. He reached into a leather portfolio and dramatically tossed a thick stack of printed papers onto the polished wood. They slid across the table and stopped inches from my hands. "I am going to cut right to the chase, Lucy," Julian said, his voice smooth and heavily patronizing. "We ran a deep diagnostic on the internal network last night. It appears someone with your specific administrative credentials was attempting to siphon a massive volume of highly classified company data, intellectual property, proprietary algorithms, and worse, sensitive client information. The digital forensics clearly indicate an intent to package this data for sale on unauthorized dark web marketplaces." I looked down at the fabricated report. The cover page bore a fake incident number and a string of manipulated technical jargon that Brad must have spent all night fabricating. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. They were projecting their exact crimes onto me. The audacity of it sent a spike of pure, concentrated fury straight to my chest, but I forced my heart rate to remain steady. I did not blink. I did not flinch. "Is that so?" I replied smoothly. "That is quite a creative narrative. Brad, I assume you authored this fiction." Brad's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, his face flushing slightly. "The network logs speak for themselves. Lucy, you were caught red-handed trying to breach the firewall." Julian raised a hand, silencing his subordinate. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to dominate the physical space. "Let us not make this uglier than it has to be," Julian purred. He slid a second, much thinner document across the table. "Because of your past contributions to OmniHealth, I have decided to be generous. I am offering you a choice. This is a comprehensive severance agreement. It includes 3 months of your base salary and a mutual non-disclosure clause. You sign this, you pack your desk, and you walk away quietly. We will not press federal charges, and we will keep this unfortunate incident internal." He paused, letting the silence hang heavily in the air before delivering the hammer blow. "But if you refuse to sign, if you ever breathe a single word of your delusions to anyone outside this room, I will unleash a legal team that will sue you into absolute oblivion. I will drag you through civil courts until you are buried under millions of dollars in legal fees. I will personally ensure that you never work in the technology sector, or any sector, ever again. Do you understand me?" He was trying to break me. He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected the desperate panic of a helpless employee realizing her entire life was being crushed by a billionaire. Instead, I looked at the severance agreement. I looked at the pen resting beside it. Then, I looked directly into Julian's eyes. I let the silence stretch for 5, 10, 15 seconds. I watched the triumphant gleam in his eyes slowly turn into a flicker of confusion, then irritation. "I do not want your severance," I said, my voice echoing like ice cracking in the quiet room. "And I am certainly not signing a non-disclosure agreement to cover up your mess." The director of human resources gasped softly. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Julian's fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, reptilian glare. "You are making a catastrophic mistake," Julian hissed, dropping the polite facade. "You are terminated, effective immediately. Security is going to escort you off the premises right now. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal items." "I do not need 5 minutes," I replied calmly. "My desk is already clean." I turned my back on the billionaire and walked toward the glass door. Before I even reached the handle, 2 massive corporate security guards materialized in the hallway, looking grim and intimidating. They flanked me the moment I stepped out of the boardroom. The entire open-plan office had ground to a halt. Dozens of engineers, analysts, and administrative staff were staring in stunned silence as I was marched down the main aisle like a convicted felon. I could feel their eyes burning into my back. Some whispered. Most just watched in shock. The guards escorted me past the glowing digital waterfall in the lobby, pushing me through the revolving glass doors and out onto the hot Texas pavement. One of the guards demanded my employee badge, snatched it from my hand, and turned back inside, locking the door behind him. I stood alone on the sidewalk as the morning sun beat down on the city. Anyone watching would have thought I was a broken woman whose career had just been destroyed. But as I turned away from the towering glass building, I felt a genuine, irrepressible smile spread across my face. They thought they had won by throwing me out. What Julian and Brad did not realize was that the massive data file they had successfully transferred offshore late last night did not go to a black market data broker, through Marcus and his team. I had quietly manipulated the routing protocols to intercept the transfer. OmniHealth had not sold millions of patient records to international criminals. They had just sold them directly to a heavily monitored shell company operated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The wire transfer was completely traced. The crime was perfectly documented. The trap was sprung. They had just handed the federal government the murder weapon with their own fingerprints all over it. I crossed the sweltering Texas street, leaving the imposing glass structure of OmniHealth Solutions behind me. Directly opposite the corporate headquarters sat a small, dimly lit, independent coffee shop. The bell above the door chimed a soft, welcoming note as I stepped into the cool air conditioning. A sharp contrast to the suffocating corporate atmosphere I had just escaped. I ordered a plain black coffee, paid with a $5 bill, and made my way to a small wooden table pushed right up against the front window. It offered an unobstructed, perfect view of the monolithic building across the street. I sat down and unzipped my bag, pulling out the encrypted laptop. I booted the system and established a secure, untraceable connection. The interface flickered to life. Marcus and his federal task force had the stolen data. They had the routing logs, and they had the physical destination mapped out. But they needed one last thing to legally crack open the vault. They needed the final cryptographic key to decrypt the stealth code and formally tie the illegal transfer directly back to the active corporate servers. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second. I pressed enter. The decryption key vaulted through the encrypted tunnel. The final lock clicked open. My part was entirely finished. Now, I just had to wait. I wrapped both hands around my warm ceramic mug and looked up at the towering glass facade. Up on the 50th floor, in the expansive executive penthouse suite, I knew exactly what was happening. Today was the official announcement of their initial public offering. Julian Vance and Brad were undoubtedly standing in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city like conquering kings. I could perfectly picture Julian popping the cork on a bottle of champagne that cost more than a junior analyst earned in a month. They were celebrating their untouchable status. They were toasting to a future built on millions of stolen medical records, completely convinced that they had outsmarted the system and successfully eliminated the only person standing in their way. Down on the street level, the normal flow of mid-morning traffic began to subtly change. It was incredibly quiet. There were no wailing sirens to announce their arrival, just cold, calculated precision. I watched as a fleet of heavy black sport utility vehicles without license plates rolled down the avenue. They moved in perfect, synchronized formation. Two vehicles angled aggressively across the front loading zone, blocking the main revolving doors. Another 3 vehicles peeled off, securing the underground parking garage and the rear emergency exits. Dozens of agents wearing dark tactical gear poured out, instantly establishing an impenetrable perimeter around the entire block. On the wooden table in front of me, my encrypted cellular device vibrated exactly 1 time, the screen illuminated with a single brief text message from Marcus. It read, "Network locked down. Targets contained." The quiet anticipation vanished. The storm had officially made landfall. Up on the 50th floor, the cameras were already rolling. The financial news networks had tapped into the live feed for OmniHealth's highly anticipated initial public offering announcement. From my seat in the cafe, I looked up at the television screen mounted above the espresso machine. There was Julian Vance, standing behind a sleek glass podium, looking like the king of the corporate world. He was wearing his signature tailored suit, flashing that terrifyingly charming smile, and delivering a passionate speech about revolutionizing global healthcare data. Behind him, Brad and the rest of the executive board were clapping like trained seals. Julian reached out to press the ceremonial digital button that would officially launch their stock onto the public market. He was exactly 5 seconds away from officially cementing his status as a billionaire. He never got to press the button. On the live television feed, the heavy oak doors at the back of the executive boardroom exploded open. It was not a polite entrance. It was a tactical, overwhelming breach. A wave of federal agents clad in heavy black armor swarmed the room in perfect synchronization, their weapons drawn and leveled at the executives. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, step away from the podium and keep your hands where we can see them," the commanding officer roared, his voice booming through the microphones and broadcasting out to millions of viewers watching live on national television. The camera operator panicked but kept the lens focused on the chaos. I took a slow sip of my coffee, my eyes glued to the screen. The sheer panic washing over Julian's face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. His arrogant, untouchable facade crumbled into pure, unadulterated terror in a matter of seconds. Julian raised his hands, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He desperately tried to salvage the situation, scrambling for the only pathetic defense he had left. "Officer, there is a massive misunderstanding here," Julian yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He lunged toward his leather portfolio on the table and ripped out the fake incident report Brad had fabricated that morning. "We are the victims. We just uncovered a massive internal data breach. A rogue security analyst named Lucy Fox. I have the full incident report right here. She acted entirely alone. She is trying to frame us." He thrust the useless stack of papers toward the tactical commander. The commanding officer did not even blink. He did not look at the paper. Instead, he coldly holstered his sidearm and pulled a rugged digital tablet from his tactical vest. He tapped the screen and held it up so Julian could see it perfectly. "We do not care about your fabricated report, Mr. Vance," the officer stated coldly, his voice echoing through the dead silence of the room. "What we care about is the fact that 10 minutes ago, a highly illegal transfer of millions of unencrypted medical records was successfully intercepted by our Federal Cyber Crimes Division. And thanks to a proprietary stealth tracking code deeply embedded inside those specific files, we just traced the payment." The officer zoomed in on the tablet. "We just watched a multi-million-dollar cryptocurrency payment flow directly from a known international criminal syndicate straight into your personal, offshore digital wallet, The final decryption key just confirmed the transaction. We have the cryptographic signatures. We have the server routing logs. We have the explicit digital approval signed by you. We have everything. On the television screen, Julian's jaw dropped, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He took a staggering step backward, his mind clearly short-circuiting as he realized that the perfect trap he had built for me had just snapped shut around his own neck. Then, the final piece of the empire fell. Brad, who was standing near the edge of the broadcast frame, completely broke. The reality of spending the next 30 years in a federal penitentiary crushed him. His knees buckled, and right there in the middle of the crowded boardroom, in front of the federal agents, the executive staff, and the live broadcasting cameras, he snapped. "It was him!" Brad screamed hysterically, crying openly as he pointed a shaking finger directly at Julian's chest. "Julian ordered the entire thing. He forced me to configure the firewall bypass. He made the offshore contacts. I have all the internal memos saved on a hidden drive to prove it. Please, I will cooperate completely. Just do not shoot." Julian turned and glared at Brad with absolute murderous rage. But it was over. 2 federal agents moved in, grabbed Julian by the arms, and violently spun him around, the sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the broadcast feed was the sweetest sound I could have ever asked for. The news anchor on the television frantically began speaking over the feed, announcing the shocking live arrest of the OmniHealth chief executive officer for a massive data trafficking conspiracy. The camera feed switched to a hallway camera, showing Julian Vance being perp-walked through the building. The federal agents marched him right past the transparent, glass walls he had always used to flaunt his power and intimidate his subordinates. Hundreds of employees stood in the corridors, watching in stunned silence as the untouchable tyrant was hauled away in chains. I sat in the quiet cafe, the ambient noise of the espresso machine humming in the background. I looked down at my encrypted laptop one last time, watching the federal server confirmation screen glowing a steady, peaceful green. The company servers were seized. The illegal buyers were exposed. The victims were safe. I closed the laptop, placed it in my bag, and silently finished the last drop of my water, leaving a generous tip on the wooden table. I stood up and pushed open the glass door of the cafe. The hot Texas sun hit my face as I stepped out onto the bustling street. I did not look back at the shimmering glass tower across the road. I simply blended into the crowd, leaving behind a shattered billion-dollar criminal empire that had been completely destroyed by the very person they thought they could throw away. Thank you so much to all our amazing listeners for tuning in to today's story. We would love to know, where in the world are you listening to this story from right now? Please let us know in the comments. As we mentioned, YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel, leaving us without the funds to operate. If you found today's revenge story thrilling and satisfying, please consider helping us with just $1. You can scan the donation QR code currently on your screen, or click the donation link in the video description or the pinned comment. Your support is the only way we can pay our incredible staff, help them feed their families, and continue creating even better stories for you. Thank you again, and stay safe.